Hey everybody, this is Tom Mason, and this week I'm going to answer some questions about being a freelance sculptor. So how did I get started? Probably since I was 13, I think that's when I got my very first miniature. It was Space Marine Terminator, and ever since then I've been painting them, collecting, playing the games, but as I got older I wanted to start creating my own. So excuse me, one summer in college I just sat down and decided, all right, I'm going to learn how to do this. I learned about green stuff, how to use that, and created my first little guy. Shortly after that, later that year, I got my first commission and just continued to build off from there. And by the summer of 2003, I had gone to the first Gen Con Indy and went to the Sculptors meetup hosted by Sandra Garrity. Met a bunch of great sculptors, including Gene Van Horn and Bobby Jackson, which helped give me a lot of pointers. And so yeah, once I had the first commission under my belt, everything started to slowly build from there. First company I worked for was called Fantasy West, and I made a seahorse dragon, which I've never done anything like that since, but moved on to FG Minis, which really helped me kind of figure out how to do characters a lot better, and on from there into Magnificent Egos, which is where I think I really started to get noticed in the industry. So big thanks to those three companies for giving me a shot early on, and worked hard, but it was very helpful. The next question is, should you charge per hour or per job when you're doing a figure? The industry standard really seems to be, at least in my experience, you charge per job. So obviously, if you are a slower sculptor, you're going to be putting in more hours, making less of an hourly wage. The downside of this is, well, I'll start with the upside. The upside is that it's a lot easier to get the work engaged because people know what to expect. Your clients know what to expect on the budget. But the downside is that if there are revisions, things like that, or if you're a slower sculptor, it will, erode how much you're making per hour for your work. So one of the biggest things I'd like to suggest is if you are doing your sculpts on a per job basis, which you're most likely going to have to do if you're working in the miniatures industry, is to either have it verbally agreed to or in a contract that you only make so many revisions. A lot of clients are really good about taking what you give if you're a top line sculptor, and but a lot of that's on you. You need to do a good job of interpreting the art and giving the client what they want. But sometimes clients are much more specific, as is their right, and if you're not following the art, you're going to have to do some revisions. So it's a good idea to kind of try and put a cap on that, and at that point, that's where you will typically either add an additional flat fee or maybe even charge per hour beyond a certain point. But that's up to you, and it's between you and the client. The next question is a bit trickier, and it's going to vary widely depending on where you're located in the world, what company you're working for, and the quality of your sculpting, and that is how much to charge. Typically, historically, the kind of baseline that's been worked out is about $10 per millimeter in height. That's typically unfinished height. So if you have a human that stands 35 millimeters tall, and then you pose him hunched over and he's only 30, you would still charge based on 35. So that'd be obviously $350. But I would say that's kind of a baseline, and where you should be looking at if you're just getting started, and but still doing a sufficient quality for a client. Most full professional sculptors get paid more than that. You just really want to work on that, making sure that your work is clean and professional, and you'll be able to get those slightly higher rates. One of the most important things you need to do, besides just getting your quality up, is actually getting better experience and learning about the whole process of making miniatures, because just because you can sculpt really well doesn't mean you're going to be making a figure that will translate well into miniatures, as far as making it easy to mold and make it hold up once it is a miniature, making small fiddly bits, things like that.
All right, this next question has to do with sculpting, so I thought I'd answer the rest of the questions while working on a figure. So this question is, how fast do I need to sculpt? That's, again, going to kind of depend on you, how you like to work, where you're comfortable at. But also, if you're trying to do this for a living, you're going to have to determine how fast you need to sculpt based on that. So, I mean, if it's taking you 60 hours or even 40 hours to finish a figure, then unless you're getting paid, quite a significant amount more than that baseline amount I mentioned earlier, you're just going to have to get faster, or, it's basically going to be a hobby for you still. So for a single figure for me, I think I take usually between 10 and 20 hours. It depends on the detail of the figure. Obviously these big guys take a lot more just because there's so much material to add on. Let's see. Do I need to start an official company to become a freelance sculptor? Excuse me. So the person who asked this question doesn't live in the U.S., so I can't really help you there for your country specifically, but I can tell you how it is in the U.S. Typically, you can do freelance work and not be any sort of special company or do any sort of unique tax documents if you don't earn any more than $600. I think it's still $600. But anyway, if you do go over that, then yes, you do have to, you don't have to, I should say this, you don't have to start a special company for yourself. Like, you don't have to incorporate or do anything like that. You can, if anything, you would start a sole proprietorship, which really isn't even starting a company. It's just, you acting as a business. And you would what that would basically entail is you would end up just having to fill out certain tax documents that would have you report the income from freelance work, and but it would also allow you to write off expenses that go along with that, which is always nice to help offset some of those costs. Let's see. But yeah, obviously it's going to vary depending on the country you live in and possibly the state you live in if you're here in the U.S. But for the most part, at least federally, it should be pretty straightforward. All right, so the last question I received was, is it viable to be a traditional sculptor in miniatures today? And this guy was asking because he said he prefers traditional, but as I'm not sure if everybody else has noticed this, but there's quite a lot of digital sculptors hitting the market these days. You go to Kickstarter, and it seems like every board game in the universe is using digital instead of traditional. And well, I guess I'll just start by quickly answering that yes, it's totally viable to be a traditional sculptor for miniatures and even not miniatures. The reason why you're seeing so many is there's, because 3D printing has finally started to get better, there's just been an influx of sculptors from schools training people in video game, design, or people actually coming from video game design, and so it's totally viable. You can be a digital sculptor in miniatures or a traditional. But the biggest thing I wanted to mention is that, there is pros and cons with both. You can create excellent results with either one. But the bigger discussion that I'll probably talk about this in greater depth in a later video is, yeah. Okay, I'll get into it real fast. The bigger, more important thing is to learn how to sculpt in miniature, and that is something that is challenging whether you're doing it traditionally or digitally. I think it tends to be more difficult digitally because it's so easy to zoom in so far, put in so much detail, make things so fine, and not really have a gauge of how thin and weak you're making the bits that will be on the figures, especially gun barrels, things like that. You just have to be aware of that, like I mentioned earlier. You have to learn about the process and what can be cast and how stuff can work that way. So we'll work in miniature, So, all right.
All right, that's it for now. I'd like to thank Machine Priest and Heinrich von Meister for asking these questions. I hope you guys got a lot of good use out of it. Feel free to, if you have other comments, questions, post them down below. Like the video, share it. And one more thing, I'm thinking about doing a live hangout soon. So if you want, post about that down below. Let me know what you think, and hopefully we can do that soon. All right, keep sculpting.